The WWE has always blurred the lines between reality and fiction. But did wrestlers like Scott Hall and Billy Jack Haynes take that concept too far? Tonight, we're pulling back the curtain on the lives of WWE legends who killed for fame, fun, and rage. Let's get into it. Let's start with one of those most heartbreaking stories in the history of professional wrestling. Benoit, a supremely talented performer known for his intensity in the ring and dedication to his craft. Benoit's story took a tragic turn that shocked the world and forever changed the landscape of professional wrestling. In June 2007, Chris had taken the lives of his wife Nancy and their 7-year-old son Daniel before ending his own. This tragic event unfolded over a weekend and left fans, friends, and family grappling with disbelief and sorrow. The investigation that followed brought to light some disturbing details. It wasn't just the act itself, but what might have led to it. There was talk about the brutal physical toll of wrestling, the possible effects of concussions, and even steroid use. It turned out that Chris's brain had signs of severe damage, something called CTE, chronic traumatic encephalopathy. It's something that many athletes in heavy contact sports might end up dealing with. On number 5, we have the story of Jimmy Superfly Snuka. Now, Snuka was a legend for his Superfly splash. The guy literally soared, but his story took a dark turn that's had fans and critics buzzing for years. It all started in a hotel room in Pennsylvania in 1983. Snuka and his girlfriend, Nancy Argentino, were there together. Tragically, by the end of the night, Nancy was rushed to the hospital, and soon after she died. The autopsy called it a homicide, citing severe head injuries. And so began a mystery that would linger over Snuka's career like a shadow. Now, the thing is, no charges were slapped on Snuka right away. The story he told about that night changed a few times, and somehow the case just went cold. It's the kind of thing that makes you wonder about fame and justice, right? Fast forward to 2013, the case was reopened, fueled by renewed media interest and the Argentino family's relentless pursuit of justice. By 2015, the wheels of justice began to turn, as Snuka was finally charged with third-degree murder and involuntary manslaughter. However, the legal battle was far from straightforward. Snuka's defense argued that he was unfit to stand trial due to his deteriorating mental health, a claim supported by medical experts who diagnosed him with dementia, likely exacerbated by the physical toll of his wrestling career. In 2017, the charges against Snuka were dismissed as he was deemed incompetent to stand trial. Sadly, Snuka passed away shortly thereafter, leaving a complex legacy. The case remains controversial, with many feeling justice was never truly served. Coming to number 4, I'm talking about Billy Jack Haynes, a powerhouse from the 80s wrestling scene. Now, it's what happened after he left the ring that really gets intriguing. Billy Jack Haynes, a former WWE star who's now 70 years old, was arrested recently after a pretty intense situation at his home in Portland, Oregon. It all started with a 2-hour standoff with police, which caused the whole neighborhood to hunker down and stay indoors. Originally, Haynes was taken to the hospital for something completely unrelated, but when police got into his house, they found his 85-year-old wife dead from a gunshot. After he was released from the hospital, he was charged with second-degree murder and using a weapon unlawfully. Talking about this on his podcast, WWE Hall of Famer Jake the Snake Roberts wasn't too shocked to hear about Haynes' arrest. He mentioned that Haynes always seemed a bit off to him, and frankly, he never felt totally safe around the guy. Haynes has had a pretty wild past. He dropped a bombshell back in 2018 when he admitted to witnessing the murder of 3 boys in Arkansas in 1987, a case that's still a mystery today. He didn't talk about it for years because at the time he was wrapped up in drug trafficking while also wrestling for the WWF. Haynes wrestled all over the place in the 80s, including in WCCW, NWA, and WCW as a character named Black Blood. He hung up his wrestling boots in 1996. Later on, he got involved in a big lawsuit against WWE, accusing them of not doing enough to protect wrestlers from brain injuries. That lawsuit got dropped in 2016. So this recent arrest is just the latest twist in what's been a pretty dramatic life for Haynes, both in and out of the wrestling ring. Now, before we move to number 3, please make sure to like and subscribe to our channel for more such updates. Now, we're taking a closer look at a WWE giant, the Great Khali. Now, most of you know him as the colossal figure who towered over his opponents. But there's a serious side to his story that often gets missed. He was training with Brian Ong, another wrestler. Now Brian had already been hurt before they squared up. He'd had a concussion during their match, Callie performed a move called a flapjack. Not usually a killer move, right? But this time it was different. Tragically, it led to Brian getting seriously injured, and he didn't make it. So what happened next? Well, Brian's family sued the wrestling school, claiming they let him wrestle without a proper medical go-ahead. The court ended up awarding them over $1 million. As for Callie, he wasn't held legally responsible. It was considered an accident by all accounts, but can you imagine what that must have been like for him? Starting your dream career in the States and then this happens? It's something that stayed with Callie as he moved on in his career. Despite this rough start, Callie didn't let it define him. He joined WWE in 2006, and man, did he make an impact, battling it out with legends like Undertaker and Cena, and even snagging the World Heavyweight Championship in 2007. Moving on to number 2, we have Scott Hall was one of those wrestlers who really nailed the bad guy vibe in WWE. Despite his cool persona and solid skills, he never quite made it past the mid-card level there. Things took a turn when he switched to WCW, where he joined forces with Kevin Nash and Hulk Hogan to form the notorious NWO. But his career faced some tough times due to his battle with alcohol, which really took a toll on both his professional life and his reputation. On top of that, Hall has a pretty heavy real-life story. Back in 1983, he was involved in a serious incident at a nightclub where he ended up shooting a man with the man's own gun. He was charged with second-degree murder, but he claimed it was self-defense, and the charges were eventually dropped. Despite that, Hall says the incident still haunts him every day. It's quite shocking to think about, especially since it's a side of him that contrasts so much with his wrestling persona. He's open about how much this part of his past affects him, and it's something he has to live with forever. Last but not least, we have Ox Baker. Ox Baker might not ring a bell for a lot of younger wrestling fans, but back in his heyday, he was one of the most intimidating figures in the wrestling world. He wrestled all across the U.S., gaining a reputation for being really tough. His signature move, the Hurt Punch, was especially famous and notorious. Let me tell you about the dark legend that surrounds this move. It started in 1971 when Baker used the Hurt Punch on Alberto Torres, who tragically passed away 3 days later from a ruptured appendix. Although the death wasn't directly caused by the punch, the timing was enough to start whispers. Then, a year later, Ray Gunkel also died after a match where he had taken the Hurt Punch. Initially, people thought it was the punch that did it, but turns out he actually had a heart attack, possibly brought on by eating too much right before the match. These incidents, while not directly Baker's fault, gave his Hurt Punch a lethal reputation. It's one of those things in wrestling that turned into a bit of a legend, making his finishing move infamous as possibly the deadliest in wrestling history. Quite the story, right? We've just taken a deep dive into some of WWE's most gripping and sometimes tragic stories. From Chris, the wrestling world isn't all about the glitz and glam. These stories reveal the tough reality that wrestlers often face beyond the bright lights of the ring. Whether it's battling personal demons like Scott Hall or dealing with the consequences of actions like Ox Baker's infamous Hurt Punch, each story adds a layer to the complex world of professional wrestling. As we wrap up, remember that behind the theatrics, there are real lives and real consequences. Thanks for tuning in, and don't forget to hit subscribe for more insights into the untold stories of wrestling. If you truly liked this, please make sure to watch our latest one on The Ultimate Warrior. I'm sure you'll love it.